I'm Sister Martha Ann Kirk, and it is my joy to continue with this afternoon session of our Creation Care Conference. This session will be in English, and then at 1:15 we will change to Spanish. You read that this was going to include a children's art exhibit. Well, the children need just a little bit more time to do their artwork, but I want you to see this promo. We have young people, 4 to 18-year-olds, in countries all over the world who have started or who will start soon. If you go to this page on the Charter for Compassion website and click Select Language, you will see 131 languages. So far, we have children in Ukraine doing artwork, and the exhibit booth has both Ukrainian and English. We have children in Palestine, and the exhibit book is in both Arabic and in English. You will see that we have wonderful young people in Guatemala. They did this. The book is in Spanish and English. And I want to connect issues that our students went to Guatemala, to an area where 62% of the children are malnourished. They help families, they help the school build a garden. And so here you see the children that after only 2 months, the vegetables have already grown. So this shows the children's artwork of Quetzal, the national bird of Guatemala, and invites all of us to take better care of creation. Now, you will see the Art of Nature guidebook, and Charlotte did a wonderful picture for the front of it. In the middle of the book, Phoebe, who's only 4 years old, is drawing in the sand, and in the end of the book, Millie has a picture of a cat. And those young women are inviting young people around the world to do art about creation, when we are in awe of the beauty that really invites us to be caretakers of creation. We are delighted to have the first afternoon session. We will be thinking about Eastern Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, and we will be thinking about Catholicism. Our presenters are Dr. Vladimir Narcia and Dr. Chris Edelman. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Martha. I'm so delighted to welcome you all and to express my gratitude to be part of this amazing international conference and a forum from the University of San Antonio. In this presentation, Dr. Christopher Edelman and I are going to address 2 questions about the ecological challenges from the perspective of Christian teaching, and in particular from the Orthodox theological perspective that is largely presented in the encyclical letters of the ecumenical Bartholomew. And in the second part of the presentation, Dr. Edelman will present the Roman Catholic perspective for the climate change by Pope Francis' encyclical letter, Laudato.
Laddie, are we completely sure the mic is on? Make sure it's switched up.
Oh, sure.
Oh, there, now much better. Yeah.
Okay.
We might reintroduce it really fast because it might have been.
I
I think it's going through Sister Martha's, so it probably got very quietly recorded.
All right. Thank you. Thank you again. Just quickly to just go back and I would like to thank you for all of you to be part of this amazing international forum and to welcome you all from the University of Carnegie Ward, San Antonio in this presentation. Dr. Christopher Edelman and I are going to address the questions about the ecological challenges from the perspective of Christian churches. In particular, from the Orthodox theological perspective, that is largely presented in the encyclical letter of the ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew. And on the second part of this presentation, Dr. Edelman will present the Roman Catholic perspective of the climate change, which is presented by the Pope Francis encyclical letter, Laudato. First part of this presentation will focus on the global economical issue, global ecological issue for our common home. Yes, for the common home. The word ecology contains the prefix eco, which derives from the Greek word oikos and signifies home. Truly, our universe is our big home, the home of everyone on our planet that is created by God. On the contrary, it would be a sign of arrogance to presume that the human being alone inhabit this world, or even more, to imagine that only the present generation enjoys its resources. The ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew addressed these challenges issues in his encyclical letters, and that is why he is renowned as a Greek patriarch, and this title reflects his commitment to environmental issues. The ecumenical patriarch is a pioneer in the Christian world to draw attention to the importance of the ecological problem and the duty of the church to voice its concern and try to contribute with all the spiritual means at this disposal towards the protection of our natural environment. In 1997, he convened the first international symposium to address environmental degradation. His effort led to significant initiatives, including to establishing of the Green Patriarchate Program, which promotes ecological education within the Orthodox churches. Dr. Bartholomew's environmental theology emphasized the interconnection of all creation. He views ecological degradation as a reflection of spiritual perversion. Spiritual perversion, we have traditionally regarded sin, he says, as being not only what people do to other people, but for human beings to destroy the biological diversity in God's creation, to contaminate the earth's water, land, and air. All of these are sins. The effect of sin and our alienation from God are not Okay, thank you. That's slightly better. Our alienation from God are not only personal and social, but also ecological and even cosmic. The issue of climate change is also an issue of social welfare and social justice. This means that the ecological crisis goes hand in hand with the spread of social injustice. This is a pillar of Christian theology to argue that Jesus Christ came to save the whole creation through his incarnation. Consequently, the church introduced a sin which is against the environment that we may call the ecological sin. A fundamental criterion of an ecological sin is deeply spiritual because the root of the environmental crisis lies in human greed and selfishness. The ecological crisis is essentially a spiritual problem because it is caused by the falling of human beings. The next slide.
Thanks.
Therefore, exploitation of the world's resources should always be recognized as an expression of Adam's original sin, rather than as a proper way of receiving God's wonderful gift in creation. Such exploitation is the result of selfishness and greed, which arise from humanity's alienation from God and from humanity's consequent loss of a rightly ordered relationship with the rest of nature. Therefore, human repentance must be extending to cover the damage we do to nature. This damage has primarily been caused by the rise of individualism in our culture. Ecological sin is due to human greed, which blinds men and women to the point of ignoring the disregarding the basic truth that the happiness of the individual depends on its relationship with the rest of human beings. The Church Holy Fathers teach us that the merciful heart is a heart caring for the sake of the entire creation, for people, for birds, and for animals, and for every created things. There are extraordinary examples revealed in the lives of the Church Fathers when they miraculously made it possible to set very close relationships with the wild animals or even find them friendly with humans. For example, Saint Erasmus healed the wounded lions near to Jordan River, and Saint Columbus befriended wolves, bears, and birds and rabbits. And from St. Sergio's life, we came to understand how it's possible to get friend with all the wild animals, like the lion or any others. St. Cosmas also preached this, that people will remain poor because they have no love for trees. And St. Ampiloke of Patmos asked also, do you know that the God gave us one more commandment that is not recorded in the scripture? It is a commandment of love the trees. Ecological sins is a sin not only against God, but also against our neighbor. And it is a sin not only against the other or our own time, but also against the future generation. We must act, therefore, responsibly towards our children and those who will succeed us in this life. In our own time, we must understand that the serving our neighbor and preserving the natural environment are inseparably connected. There is a close and indissoluble bond between our care of creation and our service to the body of Jesus Christ. In the joint declaration, the Christian leaders invite people to pray in this Christian season of creation for the world leaders of COP26 at the summit in November. The declaration reads, Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew's legacy as a Green Patriarch highlights the essential role of faith in addressing ecological challenges. Through his theological insight and advocacy, he has united spiritual and the environment commitment and raised this concern to the ecumenical level. In the joint declaration initiated by Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew and signed by Pope Francis and Justin Welby, we read, we call on everyone, regardless of their belief or worldview, to try to hear the cry of the earth and the people who are poor, examining their behavior and making meaningful sacrifice for the sake of the earth that God has given us. Their vision continues to inspire individuals and communities to act responsibly toward the earth, fostering a deep connection between faith and the environment. The most powerful message they left for us is to drive change by embracing change. We often hear from young people who understand that their future is threatened. For the sake, we must choose to eat, to travel, spend, invest, and live differently, thinking not only of immediate interest and profit, but also of future benefits. I would like to express my deep gratitude to His Holiness, Patriarch Bartholomew, for raising his authoritative voice to draw the attention of the world to the urgent need to protect God's creation from the damage we humans inflict on it with our behavior toward nature.
Thank you, Vladi. So, in this portion of our presentation, I'm going to offer what I'm calling a philosopher's take on the genius of Laudato Si. And we're starting with the duck rabbit, with which you may be familiar. This was originally created by an anonymous German illustrator in the late 19th century, and then among philosophers at least, famously used by Ludwig Wittgenstein, the 20th century Austrian philosopher, in his philosophical investigations. Wittgenstein uses it in the course of a discussion about perception and interpretation. Oh, there we go. My purpose here is in using this is to offer an example and kind of a mnemonic device to illustrate how one phenomenon can present itself to us in different ways based on how we attend to it, what we focus our attention on. When this happens, multiple seemingly incompatible descriptions can all be accurate. Again, when we're describing things that have multiple aspects, like, for instance, human actions, right, which, as we know, have different layers of meaning, which makes it possible for us to offer two totally different descriptions of the same action that are both correct. This captures something of what I think Francis achieves in Laudato Si. He shows us how to see the way that a number of our goals and concerns are simply different dimensions of the same situation. How it's all connected in ways beyond the ways that we tend to normally appreciate. So, what is Laudato Si? It's a papal encyclical. So this was a letter to the world that Francis published in 2015. The title comes from St. Francis of Assisi's Canticle of Creatures, in which Francis gives praise to God for each of God's creatures, including brother sun and sister moon, repeating the phrase Laudato Si, mi Signor, at the beginning of each verse. There are different ways to read a papal encyclical. Today, I'm going to read it from the perspective of a philosopher rather than a theologian, focusing on the ways in which Francis's letter appeals to all human beings, regardless of their faith traditions, or what John Rawls, a 20th century American political philosopher, called comprehensive doctrines. So a comprehensive doctrine is an all-encompassing framework within which to understand the world. And so religious traditions fit the bill of comprehensive doctrines, but so would a sort of ethical worldview like humanism. The reason I bring up comprehensive doctrines is because a key concept for me in my appreciation of Laudato Si is another concept that Rawls introduced in the early 70s, which is called overlapping consensus. So overlapping consensus is about the distinction that we can draw between our reasons and motivations for a particular action or practical solution to a problem versus those actions and solutions themselves. So the idea that Rawls is working toward is how you achieve practical consensus in a pluralistic community. So we can all have different reasons and motivations for embracing the same course of action or policy. That would be an example of overlapping consensus. This is part of what I think Francis does really well in Laudato Si. He's, of course, writing from the perspective of Christian theology, but the way that he communicates his message helps people from different traditions, different religious traditions, or no religious tradition at all, find overlapping consensus with the sort of solutions or approaches that he's prescribing. So, let's see. We go back a couple. Yeah, there we go. So, here in section 10 of Laudato Si, Francis is talking about St. Francis of Assisi and how he shows us just how inseparable the bond is between concern for nature, justice for the poor, commitment to society, and interior peace. This essentially captures the concept that Francis calls integral ecology. Lottie introduced us to the notion of ecology in his presentation. And once you think about ecology as the study of living things in relation to one another, that's a holistic endeavor from the get-go. And so an integral ecology sounds a little bit redundant. But I think it's precisely the sort of redundancy that Francis thinks we need, because I think Francis rightly thinks that many of us tend to think that our environmentalism, our commitment to social justice, and our pursuit of our own happiness are really three different endeavors in which we're engaged. But because we tend to think of human beings as, in some ways, really separate from the natural world. And so I think the redundancy is there to try to remind us of the fact that we are part of the natural world and that all of these different projects that we have go together. So for instance, in section 48, which I don't have a slide for, Francis asserts that the human environment and the natural environment deteriorate together. And we can't understand environmental degradation without understanding social degradation, and vice versa. And he justifies this claim with, I think, what we could call a few different principles. One is just that what is bad for the environment tends to be bad for the poor and the vulnerable. An example of this would be how mistreatment of animals usually goes with mistreatment of people. And the reason why, according to Francis, is that both involve a willingness to exploit or take advantage of other beings. An example would be the way that we treat chickens that we're using to produce chicken nuggets and chicken wings at KFC, and the way that the workers at the processing plants are treated. It tends to be a very dangerous job to work at one of those processing plants. And corporations like Case Farms have been documented recruiting undocumented immigrants to come work at the processing plant, which is very dangerous work, and paying them very low wages because, of course, they're very vulnerable when they're in the States working undocumented. So neither the chickens nor the people are being treated with much respect there. Francis also talks about how environmental degradation hits the poor and vulnerable the hardest. In part, this is because the poor and the vulnerable lack the resources to adapt to changing circumstances with climate. It's also because, for example, the poor have fewer options about where to live in a given city. And so there have been studies that have shown that there's a higher incidence of asthma, for instance, among the poor, because they tend to live in neighborhoods that are close to overpasses or chemical plants where the air pollution is worse. So how is this connected to me as an individual, right? Francis is saying that there's this bond between concern for nature and society and the poor, but then also inner peace. So how do I fit into this? The examples I've given so far are really systemic examples and not directly, we might say, connected to my daily behavior as an individual. So what about this last piece of inner peace? Do you feel a lot of inner peace today? I didn't feel a lot of inner peace as I rushed over here from my class to give this presentation. And this is tied to one of the obstacles to inner peace and better treatment of each other in the environment that Francis identifies in Laudato Si. In section 18 of Laudato Si, again, there's no slide for this, Francis talks about the continued acceleration of changes affecting humanity and how those changes are coupled with a more intensified pace of life and work, which he calls rapidification. My life feels rapidified, yours. And when we think about the rapidified pace of our lives, I think it's easy to come up with examples of how, when we are rushing from one thing to another, we're often running roughshod over all the things in between. Right? It's when I'm in a rush that I go purchase some fast food, right? And I eat the chicken that was produced by the Case Farms chicken plants. It's when I'm in a rush that I throw my clothes into the dryer rather than hanging them onto the line. in a rush when I drive my car rather than riding my bike. So part of the issue here, right, is how do I slow down? And this is where Francis, I think, turns to the ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew. So this is the perfect slide here to talk about what we might call eco-asceticism. So this is section 9 from Laudato Si, where Francis, very early on, obviously, it's still section 9, appeals to Bartholomew and how Bartholomew has drawn attention to the ethical and spiritual roots of environmental problems, which require that we look for solutions not only in technology, but in a change of humanity. Otherwise, we would be dealing merely with symptoms. Bartholomew also asked us to replace consumption with sacrifice, greed with generosity, wastefulness with a spirit of sharing, and asceticism, which entails learning to give and not simply to give up. It's a way of loving, of moving gradually away from what I want, what God's world needs. It is liberation from fear, greed, and compulsion. So, asceticism comes from the Greek ascesis, and I think when I think of asceticism, I think of self-discipline and self-control. And self-control and moving away from what I want doesn't sound like much fun, and it doesn't sound very easy. It sounds like it's restricting my freedom, because what I want and what the world needs may look like two different things. And so here comes to mind a commonly applied distinction, at least in philosophy, between egoism and altruism, right? As we all know, when we talk about egoism, we're talking about acting in such a way that I think benefits me, I, ego, right? And altruism being acting on behalf of other people. So it might look like Bartholomew and Francis are asking me to sacrifice myself and my desires for others. They may be asking me to abandon my egoism for the sake of altruism. But in fact, I think they both recognize, excuse me, that in many cases, the distinction between egoism and altruism is actually a false dichotomy. Things are more complicated than they appear, and I'm more complicated than I appear. I have to ask, what is it that I really want? One of my favorite Dominicans, Herbert McCabe, when he talks about St. Thomas Aquinas and ethics for St. Thomas Aquinas, says that for Thomas, ethics is really all about doing what you want. The trick is figuring out what you actually want, right? Because there are times when I think I want things that I don't actually want. I have superficial wants, I've got deep wants, I've got short-term wants and long-term wants. So I really have to try and figure out what is it that I want. What's the difference between what looks good to me and what is actually good for me, which of course is what I want in the deepest sense, what is actually good. But good for me or good for others. Again, we're kind of tempted to make this distinction that I think both Francis and Bartholomew want us to move beyond. So this is where we come to what I might call the flip side of Francis's integral ecology. So remember the front side that we were looking at is how the climate crisis is also a social crisis, is also a personal crisis, right? That's the duck rabbit. It's all these things. The flip side is that what is truly good for me is usually good for the environment and good for society and the poor. Happiness for Francis and for Bartholomew is not a zero-sum game where for one person to have it, the other person has to go without. Happiness for Francis is really maybe best described as flourishing or thriving, right? Living well, doing well. It feels good to flourish, it feels good to thrive, and it brings inner peace, but it isn't just a feeling, like a transient feeling you get when enjoying a candy bar or when you're at your most relaxed. It's a way of living. So Bartholomew's point here, I think, is that to get to happiness, to get to flourishing, we have to liberate ourselves from certain chains or bonds, such as fear, greed, and compulsion. These same bonds restrict our freedom and lead us to ignore the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. So how is it that we find our way to freedom? And the answer, I think, from Bartholomew that Francis is appreciating here is that it's about habit formation. Habit formation, as anyone knows who's tried to give up a habit, is difficult, especially at first, right? But over time, slowly, if we work at it day by day, it becomes easier, right? And what began as giving up starts to feel just like giving, right? That's that move that Bartholomew's trying to get us to make, to learn to give, not simply give up. This is about virtue formation, and as Aristotle said 2,000 years ago, virtues are about actions, but also about passions, about feelings. And this is part of what happens when we form a new habit. We start behaving differently, but we also start feeling differently. And what was difficult at first slowly becomes easier, and we start to enjoy our new habits. Francis, later on in Laudato Si, talks about this and about how virtues, our new habits, our excellent habits, bring with them their own set of pleasures. And then he says that they can restore our sense of self-esteem. So for those of you who may go on to look more closely at Laudato Si, this is section 212. And he gives these examples of these little things that we can do on a daily basis, such as reducing our water consumption. Something I've worked very hard to do. I jump in the shower when it's cold. And man, is it invigorating in the summer, and man, is it hard in winter. But over time, right, you get used to it, and I feel proud of myself for having done it, right? And Francis says, look, when we try to develop these habits of recycling, using public transport, turning off unnecessary lights, we feel good about it, right? It feels good to do that. And so what feels good for me and what brings me a measure of inner peace is also contributing to our efforts to care for creation, right? And we can, of course, add our own examples of things that we can try to do little by little on a daily basis. Maybe it's eating less meat, right? Which certainly has an impact on my carbon footprint and on the world. Again, all these are going to be hard at first, but over time they become easier. Next slide. Lots of little technical difficulties, but I can read from this last section of Laudato Si that I wanted to bring to your attention. There we go. Francis says in section 244, we come together to take charge of this home which has been entrusted to us, knowing that all the good which exists here will be taken up into the heavenly feast. In union with all creatures, we journey through this land seeking God. For if the world has a beginning, and if it has been created, we must inquire who gave it this beginning, and who was its creator. Let us sing as we go. May our struggles and our concern for this planet never take away the joy of our hope. So what I really appreciate about this is that, I don't know about you, but when I think about the climate crisis, it's a downer, right? And I have children who are not so young anymore, but my youngest is 10, and he's concerned, right? And kind of fearful. And because the messages that we get, which are important messages, are usually about how things are falling apart, and we're doing a really poor job of taking care of creation and each other. And so I really like how Francis wants to remind us, right, that it is kind of a duck rabbit. It's a climate crisis, but it's also an opportunity, and there are good things that we're doing, and we shouldn't kind of mope our way to a better earth, right? We need to be joyful, sing as we go, right? And see the crisis as also an opportunity to bring ourselves closer together, become more intentional in our ways of living, and happier, right? All these things really go together. Egoism and altruism are really perhaps a false dichotomy when it comes to most things. And what's good for me is good for you and good for our common home.
Thank you.
So I guess we can take any questions if people have questions.
I appreciated that this morning you brought up how we can get depressed and we can get anxious, and you brought that up. I began my journey with Laudato Si. I began my journey with Laudato Si with my dear, dear friend, the philosopher Bob Conley. And he and I began teaching here at Incarnate Word in 1972. And he really emphasized that God is God. This comes through in Laudato Si. As dire as things are, and they're really dire, the glaciers are melting. We have to stay anchored in hope. What helps me stay anchored in hope is being in creation. And our are so bicycling, and the sky is hugging me and the trees are hugging me. But I think it can be really challenging, and let's help each other be anchored in hope.
Well said. And thanks to you both for a great co-presentation. There's so much to think about. And of course, there's an aspect of this where we're preaching to the choir, because we all kind of understand the importance of Laudato Si and everything in it. But when we look around, this is one of the things I wanted to really come to San Antonio for. Was it's a great city. It's got a bunch of great fun things going on, and it also needs a lot of work. It's got a bunch of multi-lane highways and very little, mass transit. It's a place where a lot of people perish in car accidents and gun violence and things like that, and it's just completely needless. And there's a lot of ways in which the culture that pervades here pervades throughout the rest of the developed world. We'll say that. I don't want to just be anti-US. I love it here, but we do eat a lot of meat, and these are things that the parallel to me, which I think both of you brought up, was these are things that if you're not aware, they do bring you short-term happiness. But I'll say I don't know why people like to own as many guns as they do, but a lot of people do, and certainly in an environment of fear, when you're worried about somebody breaking into your home, for example, you can minimize your immediate fears by purchasing a gun. But I get that. I haven't done it myself, but I definitely get the urge to do so. I do get a short-term surge of happiness with a nice greasy cheeseburger. I love it. I like it's very easy to get in your car and drive to work. Kind of a pain to sit at the bus stop, especially when it's this hot out here. So we seem to be in an equilibrium in San Antonio and throughout the developed world, certainly. And I wish more of our friends from Uganda who were here this morning could chime in, but I'm sure they've all gone to bed by now. We seem to be in an equilibrium where what we do for our happiness isn't really great for the planet. And I just mostly want to say I appreciate you guys bringing up the sort of trade-off between the recognition that we do a lot of things for our short-term happiness that contribute to our long-term unhappiness. We're all rapidified, to use your and the Pope's word. And doesn't feel good. Like year in and year out, I'm like, oh man, I've got this much to do. Oh man, I've got to keep performing at this high of a level in everything that I'm doing, and I need to rush around and bring the kids here and there and everywhere and use up all these resources and all these things. And then for what? I always come late at night when I'm looking up at the bedroom ceiling, I'm always like, wouldn't I be happier if we slowed down and just took some time to live a simpler life? So I don't know. Do you feel like that's, I don't know, the solution? Part of the solution is just getting the word out, understanding how we harm the environment, and coming up with ideas like, yeah, you'll feel good if you eat a more plant-rich diet. You'll just feel better eventually, even if it has small cost to your short-term happiness. There really is a huge mine of long-term happiness and happiness for the entire globe, not just for ourselves, but for our entire environment. If we take that time to really ponder and take those moments of
contemplation, and the Orthodox tradition is good in moments of contemplation.
I think so. Anyway, that's what I take from y'all's presentation, and I don't know if you have comments, but I hope I'm getting close to the mark.
I'm just
Thank you, and I'm so impressed for all of you, and for the comments, and for the Laudato, and all these great emphasis that the Pope brought, and we need to think about this. But I think the religion really helps to make the change, right? And this is what we need. We need to change the world. But changing the world is starting from us, right? From personally. We need to change ourselves, and then we can change the world. And what is a particular power of religion is, and how it differs from something we call a law or legislation, right? Legislation can also change the environment, right? But the power of legislation is in force, right? Because this is the nature of law. Law enforces us, right? Society to prohibit something, not to do this, not to do this, and regulate their social behavior by this indication of, which is in nature the enforced, right? But the religion has something different. Religion can bring something which is called the faith. We believe this. That is why we don't need the law. We believe this, meaning is we can be the better person tomorrow because I understand this. My behavior yesterday was bad. That is why we talked the other day that the Greek word metanoia is very important in this sense. It is in English repentance. And metanoia means that I change my mind. I change my understanding. That is what religion can do. So we need more proof launching a discussion on that topic and any other topic through the lens of religion. So we need a change, and the change starts in our personal thinking.
I am very happy that Doni Avalos, who is in Chimbote, Peru, on the Pacific coast, he's been listening, and also Abraham Garcia from our Mexico City campus. And he is the main academic administrator there, but he's also been a leader in sustainability efforts. And when I was on their campus a few years ago, he was hosting me and showing me sustainability things. So Abraham and Doni, you do not have to make comments or ask questions, but if you would like to, unmute your microphone and make any comments or questions or write in the chat box, you are very welcome to.
So yeah, I just wanted to quickly say a couple of things that were inspired by John's remarks about happiness and about what I think what Francis and Bartholomew, and I think both the Orthodox and Catholic traditions, insofar as they kind of stem from an Aristotelian tradition, have to offer on this, which is just that I think we need to go back and try and think about what we think happiness is, because the way that we talk about happiness in our culture tends to suggest that happiness is a feeling. And so I might say, well, I'm sacrificing my long-term happiness, which is connected to my health, for my short-term happiness, which is the enjoyment of the sandwich, for instance. But they would strongly caution us against thinking of happiness as a feeling. And this is why I think we're really better off using the term flourishing than happiness, because for us, happiness has this connotation of a feeling, and that seems very subjective. And Aristotle is talking about something, it's like he was a biologist, right? What is a flourishing oak tree? What is a flourishing human being? Well, certainly it's a healthy one, right? But what are the sorts of things that humans do that constitute their flourishing? So I guess one other way into this, I think, from the Aristotelian perspective, is when he talks about what we tend to think happiness is. He says, well, look, people have different opinions about this. Some people think it's wealth. Some people think it's pleasure. But then people who are sick think that happiness is health, right? But they're mistaking relief from their illness for happiness. And I think oftentimes the things that we do that we would describe as, pursuits of short-term happiness are really just about relief. Like, we're just hungry or sick or exhausted and trying to achieve a state of kind of equilibrium, being okay, rather than actively pursuing or flourishing. So maybe one of the first steps is like kind of realize, I don't want to put this maybe too dark, but like how sick we are. That what we're looking for is just kind of relief from our fear and our compulsion. This goes back to Bartholomew, right? Liberation from the greed and the fear and compulsion that drive me to do all the things that I do so feverishly, like worrying about my kids' well-being to the point that we overschedule our lives because we're trying to prevent them from, lacking important things in their lives. And this, I think, goes back to your point about faith. right? If we can't have some faith and trust in providence, and that things are not totally a mess and always going to be a mess, then we may try too hard to fix them, and this becomes a kind of compulsion from which we seek relief, which comes in the form of, watching a TV show or buying fast food dinner. So anyway, yeah, that's the kind of the dark thoughts that occur to me when I think about our short-term versus long-term happiness pursuits.
An analogy that always comes to my mind is when you have to urinate really badly, and you then it feels so good to just be normal
That's
again.
all you want.
Then it feels you're very happy to just be like it was 3 hours ago when you didn't have this huge problem.
Yeah, right. Whereas for the Aristotelian tradition, happiness isn't a destination, right? It's a way of doing what you're always doing.
It is time to end this very good session, but perhaps we want to end it with a statement from each of us. So let's be quiet for a moment and let's each think of a closing statement that we would like to have.
Thank you, sister. Thanks to our speakers, Friday and Chris. For me to sum up, I think what I've learned is let's grow in our understanding. Let's prioritize what's quote unquote really important and understand that that is a holistic flourishing, a holistic sense of flourishing and doing well. It means I can't do well in a bad environment, in a bad ecosystem, in a bad home or dwelling. I can't do that. I closely link my own happiness with the happiness of my home. If I can associate my physical environment, my work environment, the city that I live in, if I can expand my home to include all those things, then I start to realize that it's only through that sort of holistic way of improving. If that means repentance for the old way, for how I was, I think there's probably something to that as well. But I think growing and understanding that we're rather than seeing happiness as a feeling, but looking at more holistically, am I doing well in my home, in my city, with my family, with all of society? If that's a little scatterbrained, I apologize, but it's given me a lot to think about.
Thanks, John. So I'll just echo Francis again. Let us sing as we go. May our struggles and our concern for this planet and ourselves and our families and our friends and our communities never take away the joy of our hope.
I think that inspires me today to think more about the happiness and about, again, the change that we need. And Chris, you brought this amazing concept of egoism, right? And egoism is something which probably is a enemy for all of us and for the society and happiness. But comes to my mind now. This is another word in Greek or in English, hedonism, right? Hedonism. And I think it's good in some points to just bring in the discussion, because hedonism is something doing some good thing with passion. Bring the passion, right? And we need this to inspire people. That happiness is something we have to do in passion. Thank you.
I would I invite people to look at the image, to look at a beautiful landscape, to contemplate this beautiful landscape. Creating about our common home. I invite people to delight as Phoebe is doing, enjoying the sand of the riverbank. And there is Georgian, her own language. And I invite people like Charlotte to know that love is primary. And we are invited to peace, happiness, positivity. We are invited to smile, kindness, friendship, and let us laugh. We are very, very grateful for this session, and we will have a break. And at 1:15, we will continue, and we will be hearing from Tony de Avalos in Peru. Thank you all.
That's cool. That's really thought-provoking.
All right, well, off to class.
Nice, yeah. That's good.
Thank you all for organizing and putting all this together.
What a wonderful session. I wanted to